Today is a day that many in this city thought would never come. James J. Whitey Bulger now stands convicted for his role as the ringleader of the murderous Winter Hill Gang. This day of reckoning for Bulger has been a long time in coming, too long. In fact, due to his decades-long of corruption and corrupting law enforcement officials in this city. And it was a corruption that not only allowed him to operate a violent organization in this town, but it also allowed him to slip away when honest law enforcement was closing in. I hope that the victims, the families, and many others who suffered tremendously, and in some cases were actually destroyed by James Bulger's criminal actions, will take some solace in the fact that he will spend the rest of his life in prison, far away from the beaches of Santa Monica and far from the streets of South Boston. I would like to thank the jurors. You know, they've been sitting on this trial for a long time, for over 2 months, and listening to very long and at times incredibly disturbing testimony. But they listened carefully, they followed their oath, and today they rendered a just verdict based on the evidence. Now, while they did not find that we have proven all of the racketeering acts that we were charged, and we were disappointed in that, we nonetheless fully respect their verdict. With the conviction of James Bulger, we hope that we stand here today to mark the end of an era that was very ugly in Boston's history. While this case has provided a view of some of the worst criminal conduct imaginable, it also outlined for us behavior by law enforcement officials that has ever been seen. Actions that were taken and actions that were not taken by corrupt federal agents, state and local police, led to deplorable behavior by those that knew better, those that we held in a position of trust. Yet despite this corruption, we stand here today because of the dogged work of honest and dedicated members of law enforcement. I want to thank and highlight the work of the Massachusetts State Police, and in particular Steve Johnson, as well as Dan Doherty of the DEA. It was through their dedication and their desire to see this case through so many years that it's a tribute to their professional integrity. And working alongside the prosecution team of Assistant U.S. Attorneys Fred Wyshak, Brian Kelly, and more recently Zachary Hafer, and with the help of Sandy Lemansky of the IRS and Jim Mara of the IG's office, they put together a very, very difficult case that was not easy to present to a jury. But their superb skill, their genuine commitment, and their tremendous hard work made today's result possible. I also want to thank the efforts of the FBI Bulger Fugitive Task Force, whose members consisted of the FBI, the Massachusetts State Police, DEA, as well as the U.S. Marshal Service. It was their tireless work during the fugitive investigation that led to the apprehension of James Bulger, and it provided us with an opportunity to bring him to justice. Let me end where I began today, with the victims and their families. So many people's lives were so terribly harmed by the criminal actions of Bulger and his crew. And today's conviction does not alter that harm, and it doesn't lessen it. However, we hope that they find some degree of comfort in the fact that today has come and Bulger is being held accountable for his horrific crimes. I'd like to turn it over to the DEA. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ortiz. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled today to be able to announce with my law enforcement counterparts that a jury has convicted Whitey Bulger. The evidence presented over these past months left no doubt to anyone the atrocities committed by Mr. Bulger and his associates. This man has caused unimaginable pain and suffering to the victims, the families, and to our community. The idea that this individual was able to operate as long as he did with the help of corrupt law enforcement officers and others is an affront to all the hardworking, dedicated men and women of the law enforcement community who have investigated this case for many years. We take pride in today's conviction and hope in some small way it aids the families of the victims, giving them some solace that Mr. Bulger will now be locked away in prison for the rest of his life. Furthermore, today's verdict brings to the conclusion the tale of this notorious career criminal, whose actions struck fear into the hearts of many, whose corruption undermined the faith we keep in the law and law enforcement, and whose conviction brings peace to those who now know the truth and are seeing that justice has finally been served. I'd like to personally commend the officers and attorneys who dedicated significant portions of their careers to putting Mr. Bulger away and dismantling his organization. People like Stephen Johnson, Tom Foley, and Tom Duffy of the Massachusetts State Police, Sandy Lemansky of the Internal Revenue Service, Jim Mara from the Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General, Fred Wyshak, Brian Kelly, and Zach Hafer from the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Boston, and Dan Doherty from DEA. Again, today is a law enforcement victory, everyone. But more importantly, I pray that this guilty verdict helps the families of Mr. Bulger's victims and the community heal from these tragic events. Thank you.
Can you spell your name?
Special Agent in Charge. First name John, last name Arvanitis. A-R-V-A-N-I-T-I-S as in Sam. DEA.
And now Colonel Albin of the Massachusetts State Police.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Timothy Albin. I'm the Colonel of the Massachusetts State Police. And I want to begin this afternoon by thanking U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz and especially Fred Wyshak and Brian Kelly for their relentless work over years and years in bringing forth this prosecution. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out to everyone the work led by former Colonel Tom Foley, for loss of mine, of Steve Johnson and John Tatunjan. They've worked relentlessly over decades putting together this case. And as I said in a statement earlier today, this case has actually transcended generations of investigators with the Massachusetts State Police, going back to the 1960s and 1970s. And so for them, we celebrate this great victory here this afternoon. But we can never forget those that lost their lives or were terrorized over decades here in this city and this region by this crime spree. The Massachusetts State Police, with all our partners in the U.S. Attorney and the FBI and the DEA, remain committed to bringing justice like this in every case that we take forward from this point on. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Phil Hall. I'm the Acting Special Agent in Charge for the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. On behalf of our agency and law enforcement parties, I'm pleased to see this result that's been after a long trial and an even longer period of time to bring Mr. Bulger into custody to face justice. This was a public expose of a criminal enterprise that operated for a long and unfettered period of time in Boston. It is with great pride that I stand here today at the conclusion of this groundbreaking trial. We have listened to testimony recounting those who died at Bulger's hand. We have listened to how Bulger sold drugs, extorted money, and lived a life of total disregard for the law. Never in the history of law enforcement in Boston has there been an individual who caused so much pain to so many victims, many of whom are innocent parties. James Bulger was on the run for 16 years, and now he will be forced to answer for the crimes he committed during his life of crime. We are honored to be a part of this successful prosecution and this law enforcement team that brought this result here today. We hope this result brings closure and a sense of justice for the victims and their families.
Good afternoon. My name is John Gibbons. I'm the United States Marshal for the District of Massachusetts. I would like to acknowledge and commend United States Attorney Carmen Ortiz and her staff for a job well done in the prosecution of James Whitey Bulger. The prosecution team, the investigative team, and the victim witness team did an outstanding job. Please let us keep the victims and their families in our thoughts and our prayers. Hopefully this is the beginning of the healing process and will provide some measure of closure to the tragic chapter in their lives. I would like to acknowledge, commend, and thank the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Massachusetts State Police, and the Internal Revenue Service for their hard work, tireless efforts, and perseverance with investigating the Bulger case. I would like to thank the FBI, the United States Marshal Service, and other participating agencies involved in the FBI Bulger Fugitive Task Force for their efforts in the fugitive investigation that led to the apprehension of James Bulger and Catherine Gregg. I would like to acknowledge and thank the men and women of the United States Marshal Service, the District of Massachusetts, and our visiting deputies assigned to the security detail for their commitment, dedication, and tireless efforts with the security and transportation of James Bulger and the security during the trial. Lastly, I would like to thank our law enforcement partners, the Massachusetts State Police, the Boston Police Department, the Federal Protective Services, for assisting us with the transportation of James Bulger and for providing external security and logistics around the federal courthouse and the Plymouth County Sheriff's Department for housing, transporting, and securing Bulger. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Vincent Lissy. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the Boston Division of the FBI. I would like to echo the comments made by everybody else before me today. And I think that there's one thing that was made clear and one common theme, that's teamwork. Despite numerous hurdles and obstacles that were presented in the past, everybody here finally came together as a team. And, you know, these agencies worked tirelessly and persevered to ensure that justice was finally sought and served to Whitey Bulger. So, again, I want to thank everybody here, and I think it's a new day that we're all going to continue to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Laurel? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Well, I think it was pretty apparent during the course of the trial, starting with our opening statement, when we noted the corruption that existed. That's why Mr. Bulger was able to commit crimes for as long as he did, and with the cohorts that he did. And then throughout the course of the witness testimony, it was pretty clear. And not only was it brought out in the trial, it all started shortly, many years ago, with hearings that delved into the nature of the corruption. John Connolly was prosecuted. Others were prosecuted as well. I think these are topics that have been written about, have been the subject of numerous articles, and it was clear from the beginning that we acknowledged the corruption that existed. It was horrible. It was unfortunate. Corruption exists in many different entities, whether it's government, law enforcement, in political offices, in the financial industry, and unfortunately, the corruption of a few taints and tarnishes the hard work and legitimate dedication of so many others, and here in particular in law enforcement. And while there was horrible corruption, I believe that it has been dealt with, and it was, you have to remember, it was law enforcement, honest law enforcement, that brings us to today. It wasn't a situation where we're trying to hide facts or hide the evidence, and through the work of hardworking prosecutors and other members of law enforcement, we're here today. Laurel? That's such a generous, such a vague and a broad question. I really can't answer it, specifically. Yes? Surely. Do you have a specific question?
It's very gratifying, specifically for the families that we dealt with over the past 20 years. Not all of them realized the verdict that they wanted to see today, but in the general sense, They all got the same verdict. He is going away for life, and that's the most important thing. Steve?
Steve? Wait. No, Steve? Yes.
I just echo Dan's sentiments. It's just hard to some of the families that did not get the verdicts that they wanted today. It's a difficult time for them.
Yes.
One of the messages that
Thank you.
continues to come from the families when we talk to them, and we've all talked to them many times
Sure.
along the way, they're getting a measure of satisfaction from what happened today. But the big open-ended piece that they continue to say is, but the government hasn't done its part to make amends with families or to root out the problems to make sure that they don't happen again. And they continue to contend that such things are on display in continuing form, pointing to the treatment of witnesses, as we've heard many times in the trial, kind of in referring to that as another form of corruption, essentially what the defense calls paying witnesses for their testimony. Continue to parse those questions, but I wonder what you'd say to those who feel like the government hasn't done its part to make amends in all this.
Well, I think that we've made every effort to bring those responsible to justice, and I think there's been a lot of criticism regarding the deals that we made with John Martirano, for example, Kevin Weeks, and perhaps others. One of the toughest things that we have to do as prosecutors is to make deals like that, to determine who is it that you can use to cooperate, who's going to be an informant, who are you going to be able to cut a deal with, and what information do they have. The reality is that this is a tough business. We're investigating very serious, terrible criminal activity in all different arenas. And if we weren't able to make those deals, and this is a legitimate legal process, because if it wasn't, Congress would outlaw it. I mean, we go forward and we make these arrangements with people because they have information that we don't have. They have a basis, and they provide a format for us to investigate and for us to prosecute individuals that are more culpable and more egregious criminals. And in this case, for example, when you look at Mr. Martirano, I think Mr. Weishak said it best in his closing. Should he be in jail for the crimes that he committed for the rest of his life? Sure, he should be in jail for the rest of his life. But the reality is that we made a deal with him, and the alternative deal, the worst thing than making that deal would have been not to make the deal, because we would not have been able to prosecute those that were even more egregiously, more criminally liable. And not only that, starting with the basics, we wouldn't have been able to find out what happened to certain people that just basically disappeared. We wouldn't have been able to get others to cooperate, understanding that other individuals were cooperating. It opens one door, it leads to other individuals providing information, and it helps us to solve these crimes. Is it a perfect system? Is it the way that we would love to do business? It isn't. But unfortunately, when you're prosecuting individuals like Mr. Bulger, he's not hanging around with the upmost and upstanding citizens of the community. He's hanging around with people that are just like him. And so we need to do what we have to do, unfortunately, to get to the bottom of it. And here there were numerous people that were criminally responsible, and I think that we did the best that we could. Okay. All right.
So, would you do anything differently? I mean, what are the lessons of informants? In this case, this is seen as so egregious on the part of the victims' families. They find the use of informants to create this type of quid pro quo. It might be utilitarian, but ultimately it's problematic, they think.
First of all, there's no question that the use of informants was horrific in this case. And the way that they were used. I mean, it became a corrupt relationship. That's not the legitimate way. After this, these investigations, and after a lot of the conduct have been revealed, new Attorney General guidelines were implemented so that there's more oversight over informants. And so I think that we need to realize that we need to use informants to find out about crime, to solve crime, to prosecute crime. However, there are guidelines and certain regulations that you can put in place to try to make sure that, they operate more on a straight and narrow. Yeah, Laurel? I'm sorry. Okay, do a do-over, Laurel.
I say next question.
We get your reaction to the verdict today. Just tell us what you think of what the jury decided.
I'll defer to my counsel.
Jay Carney and I showed up in June after looking at this case and working on it for some time, and we thought we were going to expose a little bit of government corruption. Little did we think that the government would expose more corruption than we ever could have. During that time, from the bottom all the way to the top, you saw the government bring out witnesses that had deals, life, money, and so at some point, hopefully this case is the beginning where people reflect a little bit on our government, ask our government questions about what happened, why it's still going on today.